Hello everyone, I'm Matt, and today's build has it all. A small plastic robot, a pair of spaceships, and more swords than sense. My high-grade Tieren Space Type is still awaiting a fresh coat of paint after the top coating went a little bit wrong. But the good news is, I had another 00 kit show up not long after. And this one's a fairly recent Premium Bandai release as well, coming out towards the end of January 2024. The 00 Zan Riser has its origins in a short story collection named Mobile Suit Gundam 00V. It's essentially a narrative take on the classic Mobile Suit Variation series of old. The build consists of 2015's 00 Riser, itself the combination of the Gundam 00 and O Riser support unit. This edition adds a brand new Zan support unit, equipped with a pair of subarms and two colossal GM Buster Swords, which can also combine. The Zan Riser was previously immortalised in plastic via the Master Grade line, again via Premium Bandai, but this is the variant's official debut in 1/144th scale. There's a couple of things I reckon are worth noting before starting the build overview. Unlike some Premium Bandai sets, where the new pieces have their own supplementary instruction manual alongside the original, this set has a completely new manual that covers both the original 00 Riser as well as the new Zan Riser. Given the inclusion of new pieces for the 00 Gundam, as well as the multiple ways the Zan Riser interacts with the original offering, I think this full-blown booklet makes the most sense. Another Premium Bandai staple is the replacement of the real grade style stick-on decals with water slide decals, which whilst far nicer looking on the final build, are also liable to drive me twice as insane when applying. A sheet of shiny foil stickers is provided too, consisting of green for underneath the discs on the head and limbs, as well as the usual chrome silver ones. There's even some fresh ones for the Zan Riser. Runner-wise, you get the same ones from the 2015 00 Riser, as well as 4 new runners, plus 2 stands. Or rather, the bottom piece of an action base, and a smaller clear stand designed to prop up the ridiculously huge Buster Sword. Something that is both very helpful and very funny to me. Something else that also struck me as rather funny. The new runners are marked not as 2024, or even 2023, but as 2021. Blimey Bandai, how long have you been waiting to shut this thing out? I started the build, as always, with the head, and for the first time in a while I went with the eye sticker, because the eyepiece is absurdly small, at least compared to most 1/144th scale Gunpla I've built. Fortunately, said sticker is pretty easy to line up, and it pops well underneath the many layers of plastic they managed to cram into the head. You also get to use the first bits of clear plastic in the kit, the clear green discs at the side of the head, and the red on the front fin. The stickers underneath those discs are a little tough to line up precisely, but underneath the plastic they look excellent, if a little hard to notice with how detailed the head is. Whilst the V-fin stays in place without much trouble, I did glue the side fins in place, because I was terrified of losing those to the carpet. Finally, I lobbed some silver Gundam marker on the vents in the head, because tiny points of visual interest is my bread and butter these days. The torso reintroduces that real grade staple we all love to hate, the advanced MS joint system. And he immediately ran into trouble, because plugging in the central joint of the torso stressed the plastic, which is never nice, and especially not on a harder to get kit like this. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to have affected the finished build, which is a big relief. There's a lot of small pieces involved in the construction, mainly around the cockpit area, and there's fortunately not much in the way of nub marks to clear up either, owing to some nice plastics and liberal use of undergating, even if I did do a little sanding in places. The shoulder construction is quite unique from other builds as well, owing to the suit's design, and because of how the arms plug in, they initially seem to be rather far towards the chest. So much so, I had to double check I hadn't somehow installed everything back to front. Another unique factor in the build is the waist being classed as part of the torso build, which is technically correct, but still feels different. I think how it, and to an extent a good chunk of the kit builds, is representative of the transitional period real grade was going through at the time. Whilst the MS joint is still integral to the build, there's some Master Grade-esque construction in here, and even some pseudo polycaps. I feel like they were trying to lessen the load on the prone to wobbliness MS joint here. In this kit's case, I think it's really done the job. Discussing the arm construction is a little harder than I'd expected, because it's all really quite simple. The MS joint itself is pretty similar to those I've built prior, with the exception of a very handy wrist pivot for more dynamic sword handling. Something that's very handy given the sheer amount of swords this thing does have. All of the armour snaps on nice and securely too, with the additional inner frame pieces improving that stability a lot. And the green stickers pop nicely underneath the clear plastic, even if cleaning up the nubs on said discs felt just as nerve-wracking as it was in 2016. As with the head vents earlier, I popped some silver Gundam marker on the discs in the inner arm, as well as on the shoulders, which are a very simple affair, consisting of only 4 parts. And now, for something else very welcome on this kit. Hallelujah! Pre-posed hands! You get a pair of open outstretched hands, which is always very welcome, and some classic high-grade style holding hands, with tab holes provided for all of the weapons. You do get the usual MS jointed posable hands here too, but given my long running grief with these, not to mention the fact I'll probably have this suit wielding its weapons at all times, I had no problem lobbing these in my desk, never to be seen again. The legs maintain the transitional feel I referred to earlier, with 2 pieces of MS joint joined together by ABS plastic. These additional pieces add inner frame detail as with the real grade RX-78 too, but I reckon in this case they add a lot more structure and stability too. There's even a good chunk of layering going on in the feet, which is really impressive. As with the arms, the armour pieces all clip on very securely, so there's no need to glue things on this time. There's a fair few undergated pieces too, and whilst part of me wishes the clear green discs had been undergated, I can't imagine it'd look very good visually. The chrome style decals for the joint are also helpful, given the ABS plastic doesn't agree with the Gundam markers. I did find the upper and lower leg armour does clash slightly, but the resulting restriction on posability isn't particularly dramatic. Finally, there's a couple of mould lines to sort out on the upper legs. Nothing too extreme, but removing them will make things look a lot nicer. With most of the 00 Gundam quickly and enjoyably assembled, I moved on to one of the suit's most iconic features, the backpack, equipped with the twin GN drives. There's some clear pieces inside the drives, but they're mostly covered up by the white plastic and 3 microscopic green stickers, which I surprisingly didn't strain my eyes or patience applying. The overall layering and engineering of the backpack is solid too, with the GN drives locking into place, and the pegs that connect the drives to the main backpack secured nicely as well. You also get a pair of alternative parts, the GN condensers, recreating the version of 00 seen in the movie Awakening of the Trailblazer. Whilst I do quite like these, I'm building the Zanriser here, so they're off to the parts bin for another day. And so, with the 00 Gundam now fully assembled, it was onto the mighty O-Riser, also hailing from the original 2015 release. Far from a glorified backpack, this almost feels like it could have been a release of its own, as happened with the real grade Skygrasper, with plenty of pieces and joints creating a beautifully realised spacecraft. It was at this stage of the build I encountered the first new pieces of the set. The back segment of the ship, as well as the fins on the wings, have been retooled to separate, providing connection points for the new Zan unit. Whilst I did find building both wings and all 4 sets of fins a little repetitive, I feel it's still interesting enough that it doesn't become monotonous. Some of the intricacy of the build also stems from the stickers. As with the main suit, there's some shiny ones to be had, and they're just as absurdly tiny as the ones in the GN drives. Finally, as with the backpack earlier, you get a bonus piece for recreating the 00 Riser's appearance in the 00 Mover. A clear cockpit window, as opposed to the usual orange one. As you can probably imagine, I stuck with the latter. The original kit was complete, save for the weapons, but as I tend to prefer with my builds, I left putting them together till the end, which meant it was onto this box's big selling point, the Zan unit and accompanying GN Buster Swords. The new pieces bed in very well with the original kit, featuring a similar amount of surface detail and elements like chrome stickers, but there's plenty in common with more recent Bandai kits, like a big increase in the amount of undergating, and C-clip connections, as seen here in the claws of the subarms. Compared to the O-Riser, this is a much quicker and simpler build, and whilst the detail is certainly there, I did find a few points that could bug people, such as obvious tabs on the back fins, and some hollow space in the parts that connect the Buster Swords to the unit. Fully built and popped up on the stand though, it's a solid bit of kit with no loose pieces and great accuracy to the source material. The GN Buster Sword 3 is both a big part of the Zan unit and a big part of why this set exists, and it certainly doesn't disappoint. That, and there's two other things. There's not that much parts wise to them, but in spite of that, the level of detail is fantastic, with lots of raised areas and mechanical detailing, like the circular rivet-esque designs across the sword. It's worth taking a fair bit of caution when snapping the parts together, as most of them are quite thin, so I figure it'd be easy to stress or break them. There's a couple of nubs to deal with too, mainly on the outer blue piece, but the majority is undergated, as with the larger unit. For picking out the small details I mentioned earlier, I decided to give a new acquisition a spin. The plated silver Gundam Market EX, which goes one louder than the standard silver by providing a mirror finish. Obviously it's a bit hard to see yourself, or really anything in those tiny rivets, but it does make them really pop, and it looks nigh identical in finish to the chrome stickers too. Finally, I headed back to the original weapons loadout from 2015, and whilst there's a nice array here, most of it does fall under swords and sword-shaped equipment. The complexity also varies from weapon to weapon, although they're all relatively simple builds. The GN shields consist of just 3 pieces, but still manage to incorporate a sliding gimmick and a combination. The GN Sword 2 is slightly more complex, and includes some of the tiniest Gunpla pieces I've ever seen, in the 2 rifle barrels inside the sword blade. I picked them out in the plated silver marker for some better visibility. There's also some new for 2024, or 2021, pieces added as well. The blue hilt pieces included are much thinner than the ones from the original runner. Finally, the jumbo-sized GN Sword 3 is probably the biggest scene stealer of the weapons, with a few moving parts and that almighty huge translucent green blade. It also gets some extra detail in the form of, you guessed it, more chrome stickers. And with that, everything in the box was built, so it was on to the detailing. As with last time, I elected to use the flow-type Gundam markers, and they did a pretty good job, as with the Methus. I did find the ink could sometimes spill out in a big blob, but this was easily sorted out with some eraser. There's a pretty large amount of panel lines to be had, arguably more so on the O-Razor than the main suit or Zan unit. Unfortunately, they're all very easy to work with too. There's no shallow ones, as I found was the case with the real grade RX-78 too. I was more worried the water slide decals, for 2 reasons. 1, because applying them is terrifying, and 2, because the idea of top coating this thing post Tieren build was also terrifying. I was a bit selective with which decals I used on the 00 riser portion of the set, some of which was down to personal taste, and some of which was down to the rather dodgy fit on some of the decals, like the ones on the 00's left chest piece. If you're planning to lob all the decals on, it might be a good idea to pick up some decal softener and setter, like Humbrol Decal Fix or Microscale's Microsol and Microset. Owing to the present lack of online documentation on the kit at the moment, I was fully intending to use all the new decals for the Zan unit and Buster Swords, but as with those on the main suit and O-Riser, I found some of them weirdly fragile or reluctant to stay attached, which is a problem I've faced with Bandai's water slides previously, but drove me crackers on a rare-ish kit like this. The ones I did manage to get affixed are the usual mix of warning symbols, model numbers and faction logos, in this case Celestial Being, and they pop really nicely, being unique to the setting rather than the more generic ones I acquired for the Tieren. I also feel they provide a big part of the enhanced detail on the kit, as even with the additional panel lines and parts count, the 00 still has a rather minimalist design, even in its real grade form. Finally, the moment I'd been dreading since my Tieren went the way of Jack Nicholson in The Shining arrived. Top coating. I wasn't taking any chances with the weather this time, and I wasn't taking any chances with my top coat either, so I picked up 4 cans of my previous go-to, Humbrol Acrylic Varnish, which I'd still be buying more regularly if it hadn't been so pricey back when I switched to Montana. The good news is that the finish wasn't a problem. Humbrol provides a much stronger matte finish with a lot less spray, and the results, whilst not perfect, were more than enough to satisfy me. The bad news, which those of you with even slight experience in top coats will have likely realised, is that I was whacking acrylic varnish on a kit with flow-type Gundam marker all over it, and with Humbrol being much stronger, it caused that marker to run like mad across the kit. Quite how I managed to forget about this common pitfall I'll never know, but it was mostly remedied by waiting for the varnish to dry, then applying a small amount of Gundam eraser to the affected area, followed by another coat of varnish. Once that was dry, I'd apply a fresh panel line, this time using the fine tip grey Gundam marker, which ultimately winds up indistinguishable from the flow type when dried. The fine tip seems to be a lot less prone to running compared to the flow type, so whilst I'll probably keep the latter in my arsenal, I'll have to think twice before using them on my future builds. And at last, here's the completed 00 Zan Riser in its frankly bonkers glory. However, we'll get to this beautiful monstrosity later on, as I'm starting my thoughts off with the base 00 Gundam and O Riser from 2015. As far as I'm aware, all the plastic colours here are identical to the original release, with the only changes being the new pieces that interact with the Zan unit. The 00 Gundam has always been a design I'm not massively fussed about. It's not that I dislike it, I just tend to prefer the more boxy or mechanical looking Gundams commonly seen in the Universal Century, or even the Iron-Blooded Orphans series. However, the Witch from Mercury high grades made me see the appeal in more out there futuristic takes on Gundam, and this appeal certainly continues into this phenomenal depiction of the 00 Gundam. The kit's strengths also extend, quite literally, to the joints and tolerances throughout. You won't have much trouble with pieces falling off or feeling wobbly, at least compared to other earlier real grades I've built, even with that giant O riser on the back. With all that said, some areas can be a little troublesome, with tolerances that are too loose in the case of the shoulder armour and sword to side skirt connection, or too tight in the case of the 00 Riser's wings, which tab in extremely tightly to the GN drives. Whilst there's a little bit of articulation limitation in the legs, the majority of the kit benefits from the beefed up inner frame and additional points like the wrist flexion. There's also a really helpful butterfly mechanism in the shoulders, making two-handed holds a breeze, and a nicely designed 2-point bend in the feet. As such, there's a lot of dynamic, almost human-like poses you can achieve with the suit, nicely benefiting the more melee-orientated weapon loadout. Even when separated from the 00 Gundam, the O Riser is rendered very well, presenting a futuristic and refined spaceship with loads of detail. Indeed, the panel lining on the whole kit is plentiful, as are the decals, and I reckon they mostly succeed in making the somewhat minimal 00 design a much more maximalist beast. That giant backpack helps of course, and it's only going to get bigger from out here. Speaking of the weapons, they may all be swords, the GN shield notwithstanding, although I'd say it's pointy enough to do some damage, but the different forms on offer with each provide yet more variety to a kit with an already dizzying amount of display options. As well as the classic pink clear beam saber blades, beam effects for all 3 GN swords are provided, and if you didn't think this kit already stole the show, these effects will make sure all eyes are on it, especially with that colossal GN sword 3. I'm also delighted to report that the hands on the kit are rock solid. Simply tab the weapons in, close the hands up, and they'll hold, with no issues. After 3 straight kits where equipping the beam sabers proved nightmarish, this was a very welcome sight. So the 00 Riser alone was clearly a kit I should have bought a while back, having provided one of my favourite real grade builds to date. But how about the Zan unit and its variety of combinations? For the most part, there's no problems visually, as it all blends in seamlessly with the original kit, even with the newer techniques utilised in building it. That said, some aspects of the finished unit do feel a little simplistic. The subarms have a great range of back and forth motion, but it's pretty lacking in the side to side department, so an additional swivel may have been worth a look. Ultimately though, this thing is there to augment the 00 Riser, and so let's start off with the transformation to Zan 00 Gundam. Starting off, you remove the wings and the buster swords from the unit. Next, you manoeuvre the lower guns into the position shown in the instructions and flip the 3mm peg for the backpack around. The gun should be positioned so that the unit will be flush with the 00's back. After that, tab the wings back in, and this time attach the buster swords into the holsters on top, rather than the underside. There's a space in each holster for the tab on the buster sword handle, so make sure they're the right way around. Finally, get the reconfigured Zan unit plugged into the 00 Gundam. In spite of being a single 3mm peg, I found the hold very good, staying attached with no problem. So here's the Zan 00 Gundam, ready to strike with its impressively huge buster swords. I feel that, compared against the 00 Riser form, this combo isn't quite as graceful. For one, I think the wings could be a little closer to the body. I'm definitely happy with the final results though. It does look a little bit like 00's answer to Gundam Seed's Sword Impulse Gundam, an awesome design that I really wish I could get the real grade of. Whilst having it handy doesn't hurt, the stand isn't strictly required here, as the swords touch the ground when stored, allowing the Zan 00 to stay upright without one. The balance isn't much of an issue when the swords are equipped either, as they seem to balance out the additional weight of the Zan unit. And those swords are just as almighty as I'd hoped. They add even more wow factor to a kit already swimming in it, and even without that aforementioned sword stand, the 00 holds them up shockingly well for an MS jointed kit. The combination of both swords pays off big time too. There's a little bit of parts forming involved, but it's kept minimal and it produces a cleaner and stronger end result. Even with this Goliath equipped, the 00 still managed to hold its arms aloft, although I did find the wrist pivot struggled a fair bit here. It perhaps unsurprisingly doesn't hold the weight at all, so that sword stand is recommended for poses that put pressure on said joint. Alright, we've nearly made it to the mobile suit star of the show. But first, it's time to make the O Riser even more 80s arcade shmup than it is already, combining it with the Zan unit to create the Zan Riser. This is probably the most involved conversion of the set, and whilst parts do get removed and reassembled into different areas, there's no additional parts required to complete the ship, which is always good to see. The transformation begins by essentially stripping the Zan unit bare, removing the sub-arms, buster swords and back wings. In this case, you also untabbed the wings from the sword holsters. On the O Riser, you just removed the fins on the wings and the back piece, both retooled for this release as mentioned prior. Combining the main Zan unit body into the O Riser is as simple as attaching the front of the former into the back of the latter. The combination piece is designed to be pretty tight, so it should stay in place fine. The back of the O Riser then tabs into the back of the Zan unit. The fins from the O Riser's wings now attach into the 4 tabs each side of the Zan unit, where the arms and sword holsters were previously situated. Likewise, the sub-arms attach to the bottom of the O Riser's wings, where the fins were tabbed in previously. The sword holsters tab in on top of the wings, with the holster pieces situated towards the centre of the ship. The wings from the Zan unit use the same slot as the GN shields to tab into place, a rather neat repurposing of existing functionality. Finally, as with the 00 Zan Gundam, attach the GN buster swords into the holsters. Remember to check the tabs still line up. The completed Zan Riser is a formidable thing to behold. Much longer and larger than the original O Riser, the sharp edges and lines throughout mean the ship feels sleek and aerodynamic, even with the additional bulk. I reckon the larger wingspan provided by the Zan unit, as well as the repositioning of the O Riser's outer fins to the back, are a big part of creating this impressive new silhouette. Whilst this combination is almost entirely for chucking on a shelf to display, the whole thing maintains the stability I've seen throughout the build, with nothing feeling loose or liable to fall off. For me, it's possibly my favourite bit of the set, even more than what we're about to look at, and I know I'm going to have a tough choice on my hands when it comes to displaying it. But now, the time has come for perhaps a top contender for world's daftest mecha backpack, although it might have some competition from the Thunderbolt suits. It's time to put together the 00 Zan Riser. Getting the final combination together isn't particularly hard. It essentially replicates the 00 Riser combination with some extra steps. However, it can feel a little hard to get everything lined up precisely, namely ensuring the sub-arms don't clash with the shoulders and that the backpack is swung into the orientation shown in the instructions. The only parts that need adding in are the dual GN sword 2s. They plug into the sub-arms, tapping into the claws in rifle mode as they do with the hands. Finally, and as you'd probably expect, the stand isn't optional here. It's this form that made me wish Bandai had charged a few extra quid and popped a full fat action base in, because the rather small one here won't get you the most thrilling aerial poses. And so, with everything equipped, tabbed on, all that jazz, I am staggered at how stable this thing still is. Even though it's now carrying 2 spaceships on its back, the 00 still has the majority of its articulation intact and unencumbered, although the ab-crunch and GN drives are understandably neutered by the addition of the Zanriser. Everything, from the swords to the wings, tabs in flawlessly on this kit, and on an absolute monster like this, that is very welcome, because I was admittedly expecting a bit of a hand grenade. Actually, I was expecting a lot of a hand grenade. In particular, the 3mm peg connecting the backpack to the Zanriser is amazingly strong, not budging an inch even when the kit is being handled and posed. The subarms are similarly tough as well, capable of holding the combined GN Sword 2s and classic beam sabers with no trouble whatsoever. As has been the case throughout, the amount of display options here really will make your head spin. Loads of swords, some that turn into guns, shields, combinations, spaceships. It's a textbook definition of over the top, and loading everything onto the kit at once looks simultaneously extremely epic and extremely silly. It's also pretty incredible that even with the sheer amount of pieces for this thing, it still looks pretty clean, more so from the front. Of course, it's quite jam-packed on the other side, but I feel the relatively simple colour scheme and how everything is separated makes discerning the different areas of the Zanriser far easier. At the same time, those colours grab attention, with a lovely shade of blue and that real grade standard two-tone white. And really, that's about it for my overview of the 00 Zanriser. Overall, it's an excellently engineered set. The central 00 riser combines the technologically impressive MS joint of early real grades with the stability and enjoyment of more recent entries in the line. It was a huge amount of fun to snap together, and it gave me a fresh appreciation for a design I'd never been a big fan of. The new pieces for this edition integrate flawlessly with the original offering, and provide a show-stopping piece of shelf candy with what feels like a bottomless amount of options for display. As to be expected from an older real grade set, some bits are still a little worse for wear, namely the pivoting in the wrist and a couple of tolerances. But ultimately, you'll be having much more fun messing with this compared to the likes of the real grade RX-78 too, which is pretty wild when you consider the sheer amount of stuff loaded onto this kit. As for whether it's worth shelling out to get this P Bandai set, I think it depends on what you're after. In terms of the build experience and display options on offer, I think going for the standard 00 riser would leave you very happy, with a good 20 to 30 quid to spare too. That said, if you're a fan of dramatic over-the-top mobile suits like the High New Gundam or, more obscurely, the XS Gundam, this will be right up your alley. It's the perfect blend of style and substance, and that small but mighty Zan unit really impresses with the trio of combinations it can pull off. Plus, those GM Buster Swords are probably the best Gundam swords I've ever seen, perhaps rivaled only by the GN Sword 3, which is also in this kit. Happy days! But that's all for today, so I'm off for a cup of tea and a lie down, after which I think it's time I built some slightly less monolithic kits. That, and apply a fresh coat of blue on my poor Tieren Space Type. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the real grade 00 Zanriser. With it being a relatively new and hard to find release, I wanted to be a little more in depth than usual, discussing the new parts and transformations in as much detail as I could. Hopefully it'll be of use for people with an eye on the set, or even the original 00 riser. Until next time, thanks for watching, and take care everyone.